The following pages are to be addressed for students of transition age. There are several purposes of this form. One is to document the date and method by which the student was invited to the IEP team meeting, to document any other agency representatives that might be responsible for paying for or providing transition services as long as parents have granted their permission to attend the meeting, to document that transition services are based on the student's strengths, preference, and interests, and that they're reasonably going to enable the student to meet their post-secondary goals. This page is to document age-appropriate transition assessments were used to help determine the student's selected long-term goals in the areas of post-secondary education and training, employment and occupation, and then career and community independent living. We want to document the assessments that were used to determine the long-term transition goals in each of these areas and the date that these assessments were given. We want to document the course of study for students that are in middle school, or if our students are in high school, the selection of their pathway to the high school diploma, and then the credits that they're going to earn, their anticipated date of exit or graduation from high school, and also to document program credits or elective credits. There's several important things to remember when completing this page. We want to check that the transition services are based on the student's strengths, preference, and interests that will reasonably enable that student to meet their post-secondary goals and address these on the transition page. Remember that you do not have to address transition for a student in middle school as long as the student will be younger than age 16. When we talk about transition, it's beginning no later than the first IEP that is going to be in effect when the student is turning 16 or earlier if appropriate. And then we'll do it each year after that. Remember that transition is for all students entering the 9th grade, regardless of their age. There's several important things to remember when completing the form. When looking at which students must we address transition, it's for a student if the student is 15 years old when the IEP is being developed, and they will be turning 16 years old during the year that the IEP will be implemented, transition must be addressed. If the IEP team addresses transition for a student that's younger than transition age or age 16, for example, maybe a 14-year-old student, and the student's in middle school, you must address the same pieces: the age-appropriate transition assessments, post-secondary education and training, employment, occupation and career, and community and independent living goals. You must check that a middle school course of study is being used, and there must be measurable annual goals for each of the areas of transition, including transition services and activities. If the IEP team addresses transition for a student who's younger than 16, if the student is in grades 9 through 12, and we should address for all students grade 9 through 12, then the same things must be addressed: age-appropriate transition assessments, long-term transition goals, measurable annual goals, the transition services and activities for each of those goals. Remember that this page must be completed for all students entering the 9th grade or above, regardless of their age. Remember that for all students entering 9th grade, we have to address the transition assessments, the long-term goals, the short-term or annual post-secondary goals, and then also transition services and activities for each of those transition goals. It must be completed for students who are going to turn age 16 during the implementation of the IEP, all students grades 9 through 12, and for other middle school students as appropriate. Here's a quick question. If a student is 16 or older and just receiving speech services, does that still mean that they have to have the transition page in the IEP? And if yes, what has to be completed? It's important to remember that a student who is receiving speech services only is still a student with a disability, and so they are afforded their rights under IDA, and transition must be addressed. What happens if parents of the student who's reached the age of majority doesn't give consent for the transition agency or representative to participate in the meeting? So if we're not able to get consent from the parent, then that means that those people should not be invited to the meeting. What about if the student doesn't attend the IEP meeting when transition services are addressed? We want to take steps to ensure that the IEP team is aware of the student's needs, their interests, and preference, because these must be considered in developing the appropriate transition plan. Also, after the meeting, there should be a follow-up meeting with the student to let them know what was discussed at the meeting if they chose not to attend. Here is a quick video that you can watch to learn more about these aspects of the transition page. The next section is looking at age-appropriate transition assessments. There's several important things to remember when looking at transition assessments. Age-appropriate transition assessments must be used to determine post-secondary education goal, the employment occupation career goal, and the community independent living goal, and to determine the transition needs and services. These assessments that are used to determine long-term goals must match the assessments that are administered. We want to check all age-appropriate transition assessments that were used to determine the long-term goals, giving the name of each transition assessment and the date that it was administered. And we want to be sure that there are a minimum of 2 assessments, and remember that one of those must be a formal assessment. You can learn more about transition assessments by watching the following video. Next, we want to talk about post-secondary education and training. There are post-secondary education training goals, and for these, it's a drop-down menu. So we want to select or write in other if we need another goal for the most appropriate goal for the student. And for each of these goals, there's progressively larger amounts of support that are provided. So the first goal, our highest level of proficiency for our student, let's say, would be for the student who's prepared to participate in a 2 or 4-year post-secondary education program based on the completion of the graduation and also meeting those college admission requirements. Next would be a student who's prepared to participate in a long-term certificate pathway or an apprenticeship program. Next would be a student who can participate in a short-term certificate pathway or program. Beyond that, we have students that may participate in on-the-job training, students that have time-limited pre-employment services to help prepare them to participate in supported employment, or other if appropriate. The next area is an employment, occupation, and career goal. There's several things to remember again here. Again, we're going to have a drop-down, and each one is, at the beginning, they're the most independent, and then increasingly there's more support being added. So at the highest level, students will reach college and career readiness by potentially earning an industry or career credential. Next, students will be prepared to participate in competitive integrated employment with no need for support. Students that are prepared to participate in competitive employment with time-limited support, students that are going to participate in supported employment, students that are participating in pre-employment services to increase the likelihood for community-based integrated employment, or other as needed. The last area for long-term goals is the community and independent living goal. Remember again that these are predetermined goals that There are several things to remember when completing the community independent living goals. Remember, these are coming from a drop-down box with increasing levels of support being added. The first is that a student will be prepared to participate in community activities and live independently. Next would be time-limited support. The student would be able to do these things and live independently. The next one is to participate in community activities and live semi-independently with ongoing infrequent support. Next would be prepared to live in a group home or other supported environment with full-time support, or if a student is going to be prepared to live with parents, guardians, or relatives based on parental preference and their independent living skill level achieved. And again, there's an option to write in for another choice. Next is to begin talking about courses of study and program credits to be earned. If the student is going to participate in a middle school course of study to help them prepare for transition, we want to check this box here. There's several important things to remember. We want to check that the student is in a middle school course of study that's going to help them prepare for transition for students who are 16 years old or older in middle school, or for younger students if we've determined that transition should be addressed for these students. You do not have to fill out these pages or check this box if the student is not going to be having transition addressed. The next area is looking at the anticipated date of exit. And it's important to remember that we want to identify the month and the year that the student is expected to exit high school. Remember that students who have not earned an Alabama high school diploma and who have not reached their 21st birthday by August 1st are entitled to receive services up through age 21. A student who turns 21 on or after August 1st is entitled to complete the school year. Students that turn 21 before August 1st are not entitled to services the following school year. We want to select the most highest pathway to the Alabama high school diploma. There's several things to remember when selecting the pathway. This section must be completed for students prior to entering 9th grade, and the focus is going to be on the coursework that's taken that necessitates a clearly articulated and individualized 4-year high school plan built for each student based on the results from their ACAP summative and other assessments. We want to identify and select the highest, most appropriate pathway that leads to the Alabama high school diploma. And remember to use the form there, selecting the highest, most appropriate pathway, and guiding teams through making this decision. And remember that this form requires parent and student signatures. It's very important to review this decision annually by looking at the student's coursework and selected pathway to ensure that the student is going to be able to achieve their desired post-school outcomes. One frequently asked question is, how do you document program credits to be earned? After the IEP team decides which pathway towards the Alabama high school diploma is going to be pursued, the team must then document for each course taken the program credits that are going to be earned next to the appropriate pathway. If a student is taking a course under the general ed pathway, then credits are coded on the general ed pathway line. Course credits earned through the essential courses should be documented on the essentials pathway line, and alternate achievement standards courses credits should be documented on the alternate achievement standards pathway line. And you can see those here. We're going to document the credits that correspond to the pathway to the high school diploma. There's several important things to remember when choosing the pathway and documenting the credits. Remember that all courses should be coded based on the program credits to be earned. Accommodations lessen the impact of a student's disability in the school or learning environment in order to level the playing field, but they don't change the content of the standard. If accommodations are made for students with disabilities, the content has not been altered, and so the student can earn those course credits. But when modifications and changes are made to the content of the curriculum due to the unique needs arising from the student's disability, then the course content is modified, and the student is not pursuing the content prescribed in the applicable course of study, and they cannot earn course credit. Very important to recognize the difference between accommodating coursework and modifying. Accommodations allow the student to continue to earn course credit, and modifications do not. Students who participate in a graduation ceremony but then return to school until age 21 should continue to work towards earning course credit. These students might be working towards fewer credits, and there might be less variety in the subjects, but they still should be working towards credit. And then finally, remember that we want to indicate the total number of electives. One frequently asked question is, if a student does not earn the Alabama high school diploma through the general education pathway before they're eligible to exit, can they return to school and work toward completing the requirements for Alabama high school diploma? And the answer to this question is yes. A student with a disability is entitled to a free appropriate public education up to the age of 21. A student who turns 21 on or after August 1st is entitled to begin and complete the school year. A student who has graduated from Alabama with a Alabama high school diploma earned through the general education pathway no longer has a right to FAPE, as the Alabama high school diploma earned through the general ed pathway ceases the FAPE requirement. You can learn more about program credits by watching this video here. The next transition page is the annual transition goal page. And there are several purposes to this page. We want to document the required components of the IEP for the transition goals. And those include the statement of the present level of academic achievement and functional performance based on the student's preferences, interests, and needs, and they're related to their post-secondary goals, including a description of the age-appropriate transition assessment. The first area is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. We want to remember that this is based on the student's strengths, preference, and interests and needs related to their post-secondary education goals. And we want to again include a description of the age-appropriate transition assessment results. There are several important things to remember here. Remember that this present level is based on the student's strengths, preference, and interests and needs related to the post-secondary goal. This information should be stated in readily understandable terms, but it should be precise enough to understand what the student can do in relation to what the student should be able to do in each of the three areas of transition. There must be a direct relationship between the present level of performance and the other components of the IEP, such as the measurable annual goal and special education and related services. The present level must be based on the student's grade level, and academic goals may not be required. If a student is in grades like 12 plus, 13, 14, or 15, then the transition of services may only be addressed. The first area on the annual transition goal page is looking at the student's present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Remember that this should be based on the student's preference and interests and needs that are related to the student's post-secondary goals. And we want to include a description of the age-appropriate transition assessments. Information should be stated in a readily understandable way that's precise enough to understand what the student can do and in relation to what the student should be able to do in each of the three areas of transition. There must be a direct relationship between the present level of performance in transition and other components of the IEP, such as measurable goals and special education and related services. These present levels should be based on the student's grade level, but academic goals may not be required. If a student is in grades 3, like 12 plus, 13, 14, or 15, transition of services only can be addressed. If academic goals are not addressed, then we want to uncheck annual goal and create a new document. Select the IEP program and click Go, and then uncheck annual goal. To learn more about the present level in the area of transition, there's a short video. Once the present level is developed, we're going to be writing goals for each of the three areas of transition. One in the area of post-secondary education and training, a separate goal for employment, occupation, and career, and then a third goal for community independent living. There's several things to remember when completing these goals. These measurable annual post-secondary transition goals need to target the individual needs of the students based on their preference, interests, and needs. They need to be related to those long-term post-secondary education goals that were chosen on the previous page. The goal needs to describe what a student can reasonably be expected to accomplish within one school year. They need to address the needs that were written in the present level. They need to be measurable to the extent that they can be used to monitor the student's progress and assess the appropriateness of special education services. Remember that each IEP must be individualized based on the individual student's strengths, preference, interests, and needs. So while we use transition standards, copying and pasting standards into the goal is not individualized, and it can place the LEA in a vulnerable position. The IEP must be written to provide educational benefit from the student. An annual goal can address more than one transition service, and all transition services selected on the transition page must be supported through an annual goal. Each transition service is selected under more than one transition strand may be supported through a measurable annual goal. And we'll discuss transition services in more detail in just a moment. Under each annual transition goal, services are going to be selected. There are several important things to remember when selecting services. There are several different lists of services. If you look at the list together, there are vocational evaluations, community experiences, personal management, transportation, and so on. And we'll take a moment to look at each one of these. So vocational evaluations, this is a service area that addresses the individual's potential for employment through assessments that provide information about the job and career interests, skills, and aptitudes. Information gathered through assessments can identify the individualized level of support that's needed to gain potential employment, whether they can be independent, whether they need time-limited supports or ongoing supports. And vocational evaluations also provide information for career planning and development. Another service is in the area of community experiences. This service area addresses activities or services that are provided outside of the school building and prepare the student for participation in community life. These community-based experiences provide opportunities to engage in integrated activities in typical environments. And through these experiences, students may also learn how to access community resources like after-school jobs or use of public library or community recreational activities that are needed to achieve their projected post-school outcomes. Community-based instruction provides students with the opportunity to practice skills in the setting in which they will be expected to perform them, and transportation to these community experiences must be provided by the LEA. The next is the area of personal management. So personal management service area addresses and provides instruction in managing personal responsibilities and activities in adult areas such as home and family life, leisure activities, community engagement, physical and emotional well-being, personal responsibility, communication and education, employment, and training. The next area is in transportation. So this service area addresses the academic and functional competencies to interact and travel within and outside of the community. Next, we have employment and development. Employment and development, this service area will focus on the development of work-related behavior, job seeking, and maintenance skills, career exploration, such as looking at labor market resources or the job application process, writing a resume, and then actual employment, such as work-related forms and documents. This information provides guidance towards employment options, looking at competitive employment, customized employment, or supported employment. The next area is in the area of medical. So this service area addresses the academic and functional competencies that are needed to maintain a full range of physical, emotional, and psychological well-being of an individual. The next area is in post-secondary education. So this service area includes opportunities for preparation of individuals who plan to pursue post-secondary education and training after high school. And this involves consideration of the courses that are needed to meet further training of post-school training requirements, researching potential colleges or universities or technical schools, and then providing assistance with the application process. The next area is living arrangements. So this service area addresses adult living outcomes. These are generally those activities that are related to pursuing an individual's desired community and independent living goal, whether that's living independent, having time-limited support, living semi-independently with ongoing and frequent support, living in a group home, or supportive environment with full-time support. And then also living with parents or guardians or relatives. The next service area is linkages to agencies. And this service area addresses the coordination and collaboration between the school and community service providers who offer transition services, which assist with facilitating the student's movement from school to post-school outcomes. The next service area is advocacy and guardianship. This service area will address the student's rights. understanding about the age of majority or informed consent, their responsibilities, their involvement, their self-knowledge, awareness of their disability, and their self-advocacy, understanding their strengths, preferences, and interests. The next area is the area of financial management. This service area will address the competencies such as budgeting, paying bills, balancing a bank account, and spending money. And the final transition service area is functional vocation evaluations. This area addresses a more comprehensive approach to assessing an individual's potential for employment through assessments that provide information about job and career interests, skills, and aptitudes. We want to look at the transition activities for each of the three areas. Transition activities, you need to be remembering that transition planning is a coordinated set of activities that's focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of a student with a disability to promote the student's movement from school to post-secondary activities. So post-secondary activities can include things like college and vocational training, employment, continuing in adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. The activities should be based on the individual student need, taking into account the student's preferences, their potential, their abilities, and their interests. Transition activities can include instruction, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-secondary adult living objectives, and the acquisition of daily skills and functional vocational skills. These activities are checkpoints along the path towards mastery of each measurable annual post-secondary transition goal. Transition activities should be linked to the measurable goal, and at least one transition activity or two activities are needed for each goal. There are several important things to remember when looking at transition activities. There are several important things when looking at transition activities. We want to enter a numbered list of all activities that are going to assist the student in achieving their long-term goal. Transition planning is a coordinated set of activities focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of a student with a disability to promote their movement from school to post-secondary activities. So post-secondary activities can include things like college and vocational training, employment, continuing in adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. Activities are based on the student's individual needs, taking into account their preferences, their potential, their abilities, and their interests. Transition activities can include instruction, community experiences, development of employment and other post-secondary adult living objectives, and acquisition of daily living skills or functional vocational skills. These activities are checkpoints along the path toward mastery of each of the measurable annual post-secondary transition goals. The activities should be linked to the annual goal, and remember that at least two activities are needed for each transition goal. For each goal, we want to list the persons or agencies that are involved. We want to specify the personnel, not by name, but by position, the personnel that are involved with the transition activities for each of the measurable annual post-secondary transition goals. These individuals should assist the student in achieving their measurable goal in post-secondary transition. The persons responsible for the IEP implementation form should also be used to document that these persons or agencies who are responsible for assisting the student in achieving their transition goals have been notified of their responsibilities. You can learn more about transition activities and services by watching the following video.